The wind was cold that evening, carrying the smell of roasted food from nearby restaurants. People moved quickly along the street, holding their coats tight and heads down. It was a busy city, full of lights and laughter, but not everyone shared in that warmth. Outside one of the busiest restaurants, an old man stood with his shoulders slightly bent. His coat was worn, his shoes thin, and his hands looked tired. Still, his eyes held something gentle, something soft, as if he had once known a different kind of life. In his hands he carried a small violin case. It looked as old as he was, scratched and faded like it had seen better days. He paused near the restaurant window and looked inside. The glass reflected his thin face back at him, but beyond it he could see a world that felt far away, people dressed in clean clothes, laughing over plates of food, glasses clinking in cheer. A pianist played soft background music near the corner, his fingers moving lightly across the keys. The old man's stomach growled, but he didn't step inside. Instead, he stood there quietly, watching, almost as if the sound of the piano was feeding him more than food ever could. After a few minutes, a waiter stepped outside to take a break. He noticed the old man standing there and frowned slightly. "Sir, are you all right?" the waiter asked, his tone polite but cautious. The old man nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm fine. I was just listening." His voice was gentle, almost shy. The waiter looked at the violin case and asked, "Do you play?" A faint smile crossed the man's face. "I used to," he said softly. "Music was my life once. But now—" His words faded before he could finish. The waiter hesitated, unsure what to say. The old man seemed harmless, but he looked hungry, and his eyes lingered on the plates being carried inside. "Are you waiting for someone?" the waiter asked. The man shook his head. Then after a pause he took a small breath and said, "May I perform for some meal?" The waiter blinked, not sure he heard him right. "You mean you want to play music in exchange for food?" The old man nodded. "Just one song. If people don't like it, I'll leave quietly. I don't want money. Only something to eat." The waiter bit his lip. The restaurant was elegant, full of well-dressed guests. It wasn't the kind of place that let strangers walk in and perform. "I'm not sure the manager would allow that," he said carefully. "I understand," the old man replied. "Still, thank you for listening." He turned slightly as if ready to walk away. The wind blew against his back, lifting the edges of his old coat. For a moment the waiter felt a pang of guilt. He didn't want to send the man away hungry, but he also didn't want to get in trouble. Just then, a young woman seated near the window noticed the exchange. She had been watching quietly, observing how the man's shoulders sank as he spoke. Something about his presence tugged at her heart. She stood up and walked toward the door. When she stepped outside, she asked softly, "Did I hear you say you'd like to perform for food?" The old man nodded again, his voice calm and sincere. "Yes, miss. I don't want to disturb anyone. I just thought maybe music could be my way to earn a meal tonight." Her eyes softened. "What instrument do you play?" He held up the small case in his hands. "Violin, or at least I used to." "Used to?" she asked. He sighed gently. "It broke last month. I couldn't fix it. But I know how to play the piano, too. If there's one inside, perhaps." The woman smiled faintly. "There is a piano. The one inside belongs to the restaurant. I heard you ask the waiter. Let me talk to the manager." She went inside while the old man waited nervously near the door. The waiter followed her, unsure what would happen next. The manager was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a careful voice. When the woman explained what she'd heard, he frowned. "A street performer? Inside this restaurant?" He shook his head. "Our customers come here for fine dining, not street music." "But it's just one song," she said softly. "He looks so hungry. Please, if the guests don't like it, I'll pay for his meal myself." The manager hesitated. He looked toward the window where the old man stood waiting quietly, clutching the violin case like it was his last hope. Something in that image softened him just a little. "Fine," he said finally. "One song. If anyone complains, I'll stop him." The woman smiled gratefully. "Thank you." She went back outside and told the old man the good news. For a moment, he didn't believe her. Then his lips curved into a small smile, one that reached his tired eyes. "Thank you, miss," he said softly. "You won't regret it." When he stepped inside, the warm air of the restaurant touched his face. It felt strange after so long, like entering a world he once belonged to but had forgotten. People looked up, surprised to see him. Some whispered to each other, others stared. But the young woman returned to her table and gave him an encouraging nod. The manager pointed toward the piano in the corner. "You may use that," he said curtly. The old man walked slowly toward it. He set his violin case down beside the bench and sat carefully. His hands trembled slightly as they hovered over the keys. It had been years since he had touched a piano like this, clean, polished, shining under the soft lights. He closed his eyes for a moment as if gathering the courage to remember who he was. The noise in the restaurant faded a little. Some people leaned forward curious. Others returned to their conversations, assuming it would be a short, simple tune. But when the old man's fingers finally pressed the keys, the first notes floated through the room like a whisper from the past. It wasn't loud or showy. It was gentle, the kind of melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside his soul. Each note carried a story, a feeling. The people who were speaking fell silent one by one, their attention slowly drawn to the music. Even the waiters stopped moving for a moment, listening. The song spoke of loneliness, of longing, of memories that refused to fade. It wasn't something written for fame or applause. It was something lived, something felt. The young woman's eyes widened as she listened. The tune sounded familiar, hauntingly familiar. She couldn't place it at first, but there was something about it that stirred old memories. Of evenings at home, a piano in the corner, and her father playing softly while she fell asleep on the couch. The old man continued to play, unaware of her thoughts. His hands no longer trembled. His back straightened, his shoulders lifted, and his expression softened as if the music had breathed life back into him. The room was completely quiet now. The clinking of glasses, the chatter, even the sound of forks had disappeared. Only the piano spoke, and when the final note came, he held it for just a second longer before letting it fade into silence. Then, for a brief moment, no one moved, and suddenly, the restaurant filled with applause. People stood, clapping with real emotion. Some even whistled, others wiped their eyes. The manager, still standing near the counter, looked stunned. He had expected noise or complaints, and not this. The old man smiled shyly and bowed his head slightly. "Thank you," he said softly. The young woman approached him slowly, her heart still beating fast. "That song," she whispered. "Where did you learn it?" He looked up at her and his eyes seemed far away, full of memories. "From a kind man," he said. "He once told me that even if I lost everything, this song would still feed my soul." The young woman felt her throat tighten. The words echoed something her father used to say. She didn't know it yet, but she was standing before the man who would soon reveal a connection to her past, a link through music, kindness, and fate. That night wasn't just about a meal or a song. It was the beginning of something deeper, a moment when two lives, once separate, quietly began to intertwine, all because one hungry man asked to perform, and one kind heart said yes. Outside, the wind still blew cold through the city. But inside that restaurant, for the first time in a long while, warmth filled every corner, not from the lights or the food, but from a simple act of compassion that brought forgotten music back to life. The sound of the applause still echoed in the restaurant long after the old man lifted his fingers from the piano keys. He sat there quietly, not knowing what to do. He wasn't used to people clapping for him anymore. For years he had played for himself, on broken instruments or in empty rooms with no one around to listen. Now, as he sat in that warm restaurant surrounded by people who were looking at him with genuine admiration, he didn't know whether to smile or cry. The manager came closer, still looking surprised. You play beautifully," he said awkwardly. He wasn't used to complimenting strangers, especially ones who had walked in from the street. The old man nodded politely. "Thank you, sir. You've already been kind enough to let me play." "Wait here," the manager said. "I'll ask the kitchen to prepare something for you." He turned away before the old man could say anything more. The young woman who had spoken for him earlier stepped forward, her eyes still full of emotion. She looked at him closely, as if trying to place his face in her memory. "That song you played," she said softly. "It sounded familiar. Do you remember its name?" The old man's lips curved into a small smile. "It doesn't have a name. It was something a dear friend once composed. He used to say that the song didn't need a title, it just needed to be felt." The woman tilted her head, her thoughts racing. "A dear friend? she asked gently. Yes, he said. He was the man who taught me everything I know about music. A kind soul. He helped me when I had nothing. I owe him more than I can ever repay. She didn't say anything, but inside her heart beat faster. Her late father used to say almost the same thing about a student he once had. A man who vanished suddenly and never returned. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something about this old man's words stirred that memory again. Before she could ask more, the waiter returned with a hot plate of food. Soup, bread, and a small dish of roasted vegetables. The smell made the old man's eyes glisten. He looked at the waiter and whispered, "Thank you." "Please," the waiter said kindly. "You've earned it." The man sat at a small table near the piano. He ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it was something precious. Every spoonful carried warmth that reached deeper than his stomach. It touched the emptiness that had lived inside him for too long. People in the restaurant continued talking about him even after he finished his meal. Some said they hadn't heard such emotion in music for years. Others wondered who he was. But the old man didn't listen to the whispers. He just sat there lost in thought as the young woman approached again. "That song," she said, sitting across from him. Would you play it again sometime?" He looked up and smiled faintly. "If they let me, I will. Music is all I have left." She paused for a moment before asking, "Do you live around here?" He hesitated. "Nowhere, really," he said quietly. "Some nights at the shelter. Sometimes in the park. It depends." Her eyes softened. "You've had a hard time." He gave a small nod but didn't seem ashamed. "Life gives and takes," he said simply. "But as long as I can play, I still have something to give back." There was a silence between them, not uncomfortable, but full of unspoken understanding. She wanted to know more, but she didn't want to make him uncomfortable. So instead she said, "You must promise to come back. I'll talk to the manager again. You should play here every night." He looked surprised. "I don't want to trouble anyone." "It's no trouble," she insisted with a gentle smile. "Music like yours shouldn't be hidden." That night, after the restaurant closed, the old man thanked everyone once again and stepped back into the cold. The manager watched him leave from the doorway, shaking his head. "That man, there's something special about him," he said softly. The young woman nodded. "There is, and I think his story is only beginning." The next evening, when the restaurant lights came on again, the old man returned. This time, people recognized him. A few even smiled as he walked in. The manager greeted him with a nod and gestured toward the piano. He played again, a different tune this time. Softer, but just as beautiful. It was like he was telling a story through every note. The guests clapped again, louder than before. Someone even left a few bills on the piano top, though the old man didn't notice until later. After he finished, the young woman brought him a warm drink and sat beside him once more. "You really do bring peace to this place," she said. "Everyone stops talking when you play." He chuckled softly. "That's because the music isn't mine. It belongs to something greater, the memories, the feelings we all share." "Who taught you to play like that?" she asked again, curiosity shining in her eyes. He looked down at his hands. "A teacher," he said quietly. "He took me in when I was lost. I didn't have a home back then either. He found me trying to play in the subway and said, 'If you're going to play, learn to make people feel something.' So he taught me. Not just music, but kindness too." Her throat tightened. "Do you remember his name?" He nodded slowly, his eyes soft. "I could never forget it. He was like a brother to me." Then he said the name, and her heart nearly stopped. It was her father's name. She froze, staring at him. "That's my father," she whispered. The old man looked at her, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Your father?" She nodded, her voice trembling. "He passed away years ago, but he used to tell me stories about one of his students, a man who disappeared before he could say goodbye. He said that student had the kindest heart he'd ever met." The old man sat still for a long time. Then slowly tears began to fill his eyes. "I never knew," he said softly. "I searched for him after I got better, but I couldn't find him. I wanted to thank him for saving me." Her eyes filled too. She reached across the table and gently held his hand. "He always hoped you were doing well. I think he'd be proud to see you playing again." The old man looked down, his fingers trembling. "He gave me this song," he whispered. "He said it would always remind me of kindness." She smiled through her tears. "And it did. It brought you back to me." From that night on, everything changed. The manager offered the old man a chance to play every evening. People began coming not just for the food, but to hear his music. Some evenings, children sat near the piano, their eyes wide as they listened. The restaurant became warmer, softer, filled with something real. The old man no longer stood in the cold watching from the window. Now he sat where the light reached him. Every night the young woman made sure he ate before performing. Sometimes they talked after closing time. She told him about her father, about the house where the old piano still stood. He told her about the years he had spent wandering, the people who had helped him survive, and the way music had always kept him from giving up. There was no fame, no crowd shouting his name, just simple, quiet appreciation. And somehow that was more than enough. The bond between them grew deeper, though it wasn't something they spoke about much. It was in small gestures, a cup of tea brought without asking, a gentle word before the show, a smile across the room when he began to play. Sometimes, when he played her father's melody, she would close her eyes and imagine both men sitting side by side at the piano, teacher and student, connected again through time and memory. And though the old man had once only asked for a meal, he had found something far greater: belonging. Every evening ended with him whispering a quiet prayer of thanks for the chance to play, for the kindness that still existed in the world, and for the miracle that music had once again led him home. The days passed slowly at first, but soon the old man became a regular presence at the restaurant. Each evening he arrived a little before the doors opened, carrying nothing but his small bag and the memories that weighed more heavily than anything he had ever owned. He never asked for anything beyond the chance to play, and the staff had long stopped questioning him. They had learned that his music carried a kind of magic, soft, honest, and quietly powerful. The young woman who had first spoken for him watched him from across the room each night. Sometimes she wondered if he knew how much he had changed things already, not just for her, but for everyone who had the chance to hear him. People came in late just to catch a glimpse of his hands moving over the piano keys. Some visitors asked if he was a professional, but he never called himself that. He was simply a man who had been given a chance, and he played with everything he had. One evening, as the golden lights of the restaurant reflected off the polished floors, he began to play a melody that was different from any he had played before. It was lighter, yet carried a bittersweet tone, a story in itself. People paused their conversations, sensing that something personal was unfolding. The young woman felt a shiver run through her. She recognized this tune instantly. It was her father's favorite piece, the one he had played in their home many years ago. A melody so familiar it made her heart ache with longing. As the old man's fingers danced across the keys, memories flooded her mind. She could see herself as a child, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the living room while her father played. She remembered the warmth of his hands, the softness in his voice as he hummed along with the piano, the smell of tea and fresh bread in the kitchen. And now, here it was again, alive and breathing through this man, connecting past and present in a single fragile moment. When the last note lingered in the air and slowly faded, the room was still. Not a sound broke the silence. Even the clinking of forks seemed to wait, as if holding its breath. Then the applause began, hesitant at first and then full and wholehearted. People stood, clapped, and smiled, many of them moved to tears. The old man simply lowered his hands and bowed slightly, a faint, humble smile on his lips. The young woman approached him immediately, unable to contain her curiosity. "Where did you learn that song?" she asked, her voice soft but urgent. The old man's eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and recognition. He paused, fingers resting on the keys, and for a moment he seemed far away. "I learned it from someone very dear to me," he said quietly, "a man who changed my life. He taught me not only music, but how to see the world with compassion. And he wanted me to remember that even when life is cruel, something beautiful can always survive." The young woman's heart raced. She pulled out a small photograph from her wallet, a picture of her father smiling warmly in a sunlit room. "This is him," she whispered. The old man stared at the photo and his eyes widened. He shook his head slightly as if he could not believe what he was seeing. Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes. "It's him," he said, voice trembling. I searched for him for years. I never thought I'd see him again, not even like this. I never thought I'd find a way to thank him." She reached across the table and gently placed her hand over his. "You don't need to thank him. He would be proud to see you now. Look at what you've done. The music, the joy you bring. You've honored him every day without even knowing it." The old man blinked back tears and nodded slowly. For the first time in years, he felt the weight on his shoulders lift, even if just a little. It was as if a bridge had been built between the past and the present, and he was finally standing on solid ground again. From that evening on, the connection between them grew stronger. She told him stories of her father, the way he had cared for his students, the lessons he had shared beyond music, the moments of kindness that had shaped her own life. The old man shared his own stories too. The nights he had spent sleeping on benches, the days he had wandered through cities, the people he had met along the way who had shown him brief sparks of generosity and hope. Each story they shared was like a note in a song, weaving their lives together in a quiet harmony. And every night the piano was at the center, carrying their shared past, their gratitude, and their newfound connection. Word of the old man's talent spread slowly. Some guests returned repeatedly, wanting to hear him play the pieces that seemed to touch something deeper than ordinary music. Others asked the young woman about him, curious how a man who appeared so fragile could possess such skill and emotion. She told them about the chance encounter, about the kindness that allowed him to play, about the music that connected him to her father. But beyond the applause and curiosity, something else began to happen. The old man noticed that people were changing, just a little but enough to matter. A man who had seemed impatient and gruff left a tip and smiled. A child who had been shy and withdrawn clapped freely and laughed. And the young woman, watching from the table near the piano, realized that the simple act of giving someone a chance had ripple effects far beyond what anyone could see. One night, after closing, the young woman invited him to her home. She wanted him to see her father's piano, the one he had played for so many years before life had taken him away. The old man hesitated at first, unsure if he had the right to enter someone's home, but she insisted. "It's not just a piano," she said gently. "It's a memory, a way to keep him alive. I want you to play it if you feel ready." When he entered the house, he felt a strange mix of awe and reverence. The piano sat in the corner of a quiet living room, polished and waiting. Dust had gathered on the keys, but it didn't matter. The history, the life it had known, the music it had carried, were more important than its condition. He sat down slowly, placing his hands on the keys. The familiar weight and feel of them brought memories rushing back. He closed his eyes and began to play. At first, the notes were tentative, almost shy, but then they grew stronger, richer, filled with emotion. It was as if the piano remembered him too, and together they were telling a story that had been waiting decades to be told. The young woman sat nearby, listening in awe. She could see the same light in his eyes that had once shone in her father's. She could hear the love, the gratitude, the longing, all woven into the melody. It wasn't just music. It was a conversation, a reunion of hearts that had been separated by time, distance, and circumstance. When the song ended, both of them sat in silence. The room felt sacred, filled with the presence of memories, love, and something timeless. The old man looked up at her, and for the first time he smiled fully, without hesitation or reservation. "Thank you," he whispered, "for letting me feel this again, for letting me be part of this memory." "You don't need to thank me," she replied. "You've already brought it back alive. You've reminded me that kindness, music, and memory can survive even the hardest times." From that night on, the old man played not just at the restaurant, but also in her home occasionally. Each time it was more than music. It was a bridge between the past and the present, between teacher and student, between lives that had been shaped by kindness and chance. People who heard him play felt something shift inside themselves. They didn't always understand it, but they felt the warmth, the humanity, and the honesty. They felt the power of a story told not with words, but with notes, pauses, and silences. The old man no longer asked for meals or shelter. He still carried a small bag, still walked through streets, but he had found something more permanent: purpose, connection, and the joy of sharing what he loved most. And the young woman, who had once simply wanted to help a stranger, discovered that sometimes one small act of kindness can lead to something far greater than anyone could imagine. It could restore lives, bridge gaps, and even bring music back to those who had almost forgotten how to listen. Even after years of hardship, The old man realized that life had a way of giving back in ways that were quiet, gentle, and unexpected. It wasn't about fame or wealth, but about moments, small, fleeting, yet powerful enough to change the course of a life. And every night when he played the piano, he remembered not only the teacher who had once saved him, but also the people who had given him a chance when he thought he had nothing left. Every note was a thank you, every melody a reminder that kindness echoes far beyond the moment it is given. The restaurant had grown quieter over the past few weeks as the old man settled into a routine. He arrived in the early evening, carrying only his small bag, his eyes thoughtful and his hands ready for the piano. The young woman had convinced the manager to let him play every night, and the regular guests had begun to expect him. Some came specifically to hear him play, drawn not just by curiosity but by the warmth and emotion he brought into the room. One evening, as he set himself at the piano, the young woman noticed something unusual. The old man's fingers hovered over the keys longer than usual, and his expression was distant. It wasn't nervousness, it was something deeper. He seemed to be remembering, thinking, feeling something that went far beyond the music. She wondered silently what was on his mind. When he began to play, the melody was soft at first, almost fragile, but it grew steadily, filling every corner of the restaurant. There was a weight to this tune, a story hidden between the notes. People stopped speaking, and even the regular diners who had grown accustomed to his music sat in quiet awe. They didn't know why this melody felt different, but it did. It was more intimate, more urgent, as if the music itself was trying to tell a secret. The young woman watched closely, her heart tight with anticipation. She could feel that this song carried meaning beyond what she could immediately understand. The old man's eyes were closed, his expression peaceful yet intense, and his hands moved across the keys with a confidence that came not just from skill but from experience, pain, and gratitude. As the last note lingered, the restaurant remained silent for a long moment. Then the clapping began, hesitant at first, then strong and genuine. But this time it wasn't just the usual applause. The young woman noticed that the old man's eyes were moist, that his lips trembled slightly as he bowed. Something inside him had shifted tonight, and she wanted to understand what had happened. After he finished playing, she approached him carefully. "That song," she said softly, "it felt personal, like it was more than just music. What does it mean?" The old man looked at her, his gaze steady but heavy with emotion. "It's a song my teacher used to play," he said. "The man who saved me when I had nothing. It was his favorite, and he told me that whenever I felt lost I should play it. It would remind me that kindness exists even in the darkest times." Her throat tightened. She had heard the story beforehand about her father, the man who had quietly helped a student in need many years ago. She showed him the photograph again. "This is him," she whispered. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he leaned closer to the photo, his eyes tracing the familiar face. Tears gathered slowly in the corners of his eyes. "I never thought I'd see him again," he said softly. "I searched for him for years after I left. I wanted to thank him, to show him that his kindness wasn't wasted." She reached out and gently held his hand. "He would be proud. You've honored him just by playing. You've kept his memory alive in a way that nothing else could." The old man's lips trembled, and for a moment he could barely speak. I never imagined that I would be able to see the person who gave me so much, or that I would meet someone connected to him." "Sometimes life works that way," she said gently, "in ways we don't expect with people we don't plan for. That's how we find meaning." He nodded slowly, the weight of years pressing against him and then lifting a little. "It feels like I've been wandering for a lifetime, and now it's like I've finally come home." From that night on, their connection deepened. She began to invite him into her home more often, showing him her father's piano, playing small pieces together, and sharing stories of her family. The old man had never felt such comfort in years, a sense of belonging that went beyond music or food. He was no longer just a guest at the restaurant. He was part of a story larger than himself. One evening, the young woman asked him about his life before he had met her father. He hesitated, his hands resting in his lap. Then slowly he began to speak. "I was lost for many years," he said. "I had no home, no family, nothing to hold on to except music. Sometimes I slept in parks. Sometimes I found shelter with strangers who showed a little kindness. But every day was a struggle, and every night I would play imagining a better world. It was the only thing that kept me going." She listened carefully, her heart aching. "And then your teacher found you?" "Yes," he said. "He took me in, gave me lessons, fed me, and reminded me that the world wasn't entirely cruel. He taught me that if I shared music and kindness, it could reach others, even when I had nothing to give in return." I never forgot that lesson. The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "That's exactly how I feel when I hear you play. You're giving us more than music, and you're giving hope." He smiled faintly, the first time in weeks that he seemed completely at ease. "And yet I feel that I have received more than I have given." Weeks turned into months. The old man's presence at the restaurant became a steady rhythm in the lives of those who visited. Regular diners came not only for food, but to hear his music, to feel the peace and reflection it brought. People began leaving notes of appreciation, small gifts, and sometimes even meals for him. But he accepted none of it with pride, only gratitude. The young woman watched quietly as he interacted with others. He had a way of making each person feel seen, even when he himself had so little. He would nod politely, smile softly, and speak with gentle humor that made strangers relax. His music was more than performance. It was a bridge between lives, between hearts that might have been too busy or too distracted to notice the small joys around them. One night, after a particularly moving performance, the young woman asked him if he would consider teaching music to others. She suggested starting with children, perhaps at the local community center. The old man hesitated. "I'm not sure," he said. "I'm not a professional teacher. I've learned from life, from mistakes, and from one very kind man. But maybe it's exactly what the world needs," she said. "You can show others what you've learned, not just about music, but about patience, kindness, and hope." For the first time in years, he considered the idea. He could feel the possibility, fragile but real. Maybe he could give back the gift that had saved him. Maybe he could change someone else's life as he had been changed. That thought stayed with him through the night. When he walked home under the quiet streetlights, he imagined children learning to play, their faces lighting up as they discovered the magic in music. He imagined moments of laughter, moments of pride, moments of connection that could grow from a simple act of teaching. The next day, he began to prepare. He dusted off old music sheets, practiced pieces he hadn't touched in years, and thought carefully about how to explain the emotions behind each note. He wanted every student to understand that music wasn't just about skill. It was about sharing yourself, giving a part of your soul to someone else, and listening to the souls of others in return. When the day finally came to teach his first students, he felt nervous for the first time in decades. But as the children gathered around, curious and wide-eyed, he realized that this was exactly where he was meant to be. He smiled, took a deep breath, and began to play. The notes floated through the room, soft and welcoming, and slowly, the children began to respond. Some followed his hands on the piano keys, others hummed along, and a few just watched, mesmerized by the sound. The old man guided them gently, correcting mistakes with patience, encouraging effort with warmth, and sharing stories between the songs that taught more than music ever could. And in that moment, he felt a connection deeper than he had ever known. It wasn't about applause, meals, or recognition. It was about giving, sharing, and being part of something larger than himself. A ripple of kindness, a chain of music and love that could continue for years, touching lives he would never even meet. The young woman, watching from the doorway, smiled quietly. She realized that the stranger who had once asked for a meal was now creating joy and purpose for others. She had never expected that one act of kindness, allowing him to play, could grow into something so powerful. The old man paused mid-song, looked at the children, and felt a wave of gratitude. His life had been hard and at times lonely, but now, finally, he understood the truth his teacher had tried to teach him so long ago. The gift of giving is greater than any gift received. And sometimes a single act of compassion can change not only one life but countless others, spreading quietly, beautifully, and endlessly. The days grew warmer as spring approached, and the old man's life felt fuller than it had in decades. He still arrived at the restaurant each evening, but now he did so with a purpose beyond music for meals. His fingers danced across the piano keys with ease, carrying the stories of his past, the lessons of his teacher, and the joy of being able to share his talent with others. Each note seemed to fill the room with more than sound. It brought comfort, hope, and a sense of connection that reached every corner. The young woman watched him quietly from her usual table, smiling softly. She had been part of this journey from the very beginning, the moment she had convinced the manager to let him play for a meal. What had started as a small act of kindness had blossomed into something much greater than she had imagined. The old man wasn't just a musician now. He was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the quiet power of compassion. One evening, after the restaurant had closed and the last guests had left, the old man packed up his things. He hesitated for a moment, looking back at the piano that had become both his companion and his voice. The young woman approached him, holding an envelope in her hand. "This is for you," she said softly. "It's from the manager. He insisted you take it." He opened the envelope carefully and found a letter inside. The letter was an offer, a permanent position to play at the restaurant every evening with full support and respect. The words made his heart race. He had never expected anything like this. He had asked for a meal once, not for recognition, not for a home. And yet here it was. An opportunity to belong, to have stability, and to share his music every day. I don't know what to say," he whispered, his eyes glistening. "I never expected this." "You deserve it," she said firmly. "You've given so much to everyone here. It's time the world gave back to you." For the first time in years, the old man felt truly seen. He accepted the offer with a quiet nod, and from that night on, his evenings were no longer uncertain. The restaurant became a place where he was welcomed not just as a performer, but as a cherished member of a community. But the offer meant more than stability. It gave him the courage to reach further, to explore the possibilities he had long thought closed to him. He began teaching children regularly, not just in the restaurant but in the local community center. The children were fascinated by him, by his stories, his patience, and the way he treated music as something alive, not just notes on a page. The first class was tentative. Some children were shy, others skeptical. But when the old man began to play, the room seemed to breathe with him. The children leaned closer, listening, feeling the music in their bones. They followed his hands, mimicked his gestures, and slowly, laughter and excitement filled the space. He taught them not just melodies, but the meaning behind them, how to listen, how to feel, how to connect through music. The young woman visited often, helping him organize classes, arranging instruments, and encouraging the children. Together, they built something more than lessons. They built a small community, a place where music, kindness, and support created a safe space for growth. One afternoon, as the old man sat with a young student struggling to hit the right notes, he noticed something familiar. The boy's hands were small, tentative, but there was determination in his eyes, the same determination the old man had once carried. He leaned over, guiding the boy gently, and whispered, "It's okay to make mistakes. Music isn't about perfection. It's about feeling." The boy's eyes lit up and he tried again, this time producing the correct sound. The old man smiled, a warmth spreading through him that no applause or recognition could ever match. He realized that in teaching, he was passing on more than skill. He was passing on hope, the same hope that had been given to him so many years ago. Word spread about the classes. Parents came, curious about the old man who had once played for a meal and now taught with patience, care, and understanding. They were amazed at how quickly the children learned, not just notes and rhythms, but how to feel the music, how to express themselves, and how to believe in themselves. The old man's life had transformed. He no longer worried about meals, shelter, or survival. Instead, he lived with purpose. Every day brought opportunities to create, to share, and to connect. He saw the beauty in small moments, a child's smile, a parent's gratitude, a student finally mastering a piece of music. One evening, as the restaurant prepared for the last guests, the old man played a familiar melody, the one his teacher had composed and passed on to him. It filled the room with emotion, soft and tender, echoing through the hearts of everyone present. The young woman watched him, tears in her eyes, feeling the profound impact of what had started as a simple act of kindness. When the song ended, the applause was loud and genuine, but the old man barely noticed. He looked at the young woman and said quietly, "Do you know why this feels different tonight?" She shook her head. "Because tonight I see the full circle," he said. "From being lost and hungry to being welcomed to teaching to seeing lives change, it all connects. The music has brought me here, but the people, they've carried me further than I ever imagined." She smiled, understanding. It's amazing what a single act of kindness can do. One meal, one chance can ripple through lives in ways we never expect. He nodded, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and humility. "I was given a chance when I had nothing, and now I can give back." The following weeks were filled with music, laughter, and connection. The children's classes expanded, more students joined, and the restaurant flourished with his performances. He became a beloved figure, known not just for his skill but for his generosity, patience, and warmth. He was no longer a stranger asking for a meal. He was a mentor, a friend, and a symbol of hope. One evening, after a particularly long day of teaching, he sat alone at the restaurant piano. The lights were dim, and the last guests had left. He closed his eyes and played the melody that had started it all, the song his teacher had given him, the song that had carried him through years of hardship. Each note was a reminder of where he had been, of the kindness that had lifted him, and of the people who now allowed him to lift others. As he finished the final note, he felt a deep sense of peace. His journey had been difficult, filled with loss and struggle, but it had brought him to a place where he could truly belong. The music had been his companion, his teacher, and his bridge to others. And through it, he had discovered that life's true meaning often comes from giving, sharing, and connecting. The young woman entered quietly, watching him with a gentle smile. She didn't need to speak. He understood her presence. Together, they sat in the quiet, listening to the echoes of the music, feeling the warmth of the moment. It wasn't just about a piano or a song anymore. It was about life, about love, about the ripple effect of kindness and the power of human connection. From that night on, the old man played with purpose, taught with passion, and lived with gratitude. His life had transformed from a search for survival to a journey of giving, teaching, and connecting. Every note he played carried the lessons of his past, the love of his teacher, and the hope that he could touch hearts in ways that words never could. And so, the man who once asked for a meal to fill his empty stomach became a living reminder that a single act of compassion can change everything. That one small choice, now to allow him to play, had grown into a story of redemption, hope, and the enduring power of music. Through his fingers, through his teaching, and through his presence, countless lives were touched, and the legacy of kindness and music continued, stronger than ever. The restaurant no longer just served food. It served moments, memories, and connections. And the old man no longer just played the piano. He told stories, healed hearts, and reminded everyone who listened that even in the darkest times, there is light, there is hope, and there is the extraordinary power of one human being reaching out to another. As he closed the piano lid each night, he would look around, smile gently, and whisper a quiet prayer of thanks. For the chance to play, for the chance to teach, for the people who had believed in him, and for the knowledge that he had finally found a place to call home. Not in a building or a room, but in the hearts of those who had heard him, learned from him, and shared in his journey. And so his story continued, not as a tale of struggle, but as a living testament to the idea that when kindness meets talent, when compassion meets opportunity, miracles can unfold in the most unexpected and beautiful ways.